Welcome to the Brains Banter Podcast. We have Emma Bragdon here today, just one of my favorite people, such a huge hero and influence for me. Emma did her PhD at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology and has just done amazing work since then. Wrote 2 books on spiritual emergency, which is what we're going to talk about a lot today. So Emma, do you mind starting by just telling your personal story and sort of how you got into sort of the subject of spiritual emergence and emergency, and if that's sort of like very close to you personally as well?
I'd be happy to. And if, as I'm telling my story, you have a question or something, feel free to interrupt me. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So like many of us, my family was not perfect. And that means that I really had felt neglected in a strong way. And I somehow, on a personal level, process on a very deep level. So I was at a very young age looking around going, what the hell is going on here? Something's off. And so as it turns out, I've learned about myself that I'm not only an empath, but what we can call a sensitive. And in Brazil, I'm seen as someone who has very highly developed intuition. Cool. And that, of course, did not come just out of the chute. I've developed that over years. But I certainly was using my intuition early on. And I don't know how this happened, but even at the age of 8, something just dropped into my mind that said, you're going to be helping in the transformation of psychiatry. Now, I couldn't even figure out what that word was, except my dad was a pathologist. He taught at Harvard Medical School, and he went on to work at the National Institutes of Health and Research. So there was a lot of medical language happening. And unfortunately, my dad really stigmatized people who were what has been conventionally called mental illness.
Right.
So it was kind of pushed away with a laugh, but it was something that was extremely interesting to me from a young age. So then when I reached into my teenage years, I started feeling like something is really off, and I was quite unhappy and really was looking at mortality, even at 15, 16 years old, which was at the same time that my parents had decided to separate. So anyway, I hit into a period of darkness quite early on, but we're talking about a time in the early 60s when, there weren't medications around. People weren't just doling out meds to their kids very easily as they do today, and is oftentimes supported today. So, and I had decided that I wasn't really in a safe space to talk about my inner life, or even to talk about it with myself, So anyway, I kept a lot of it inside until I had an experience of falling in love with someone. I was actually in Germany. It was with a lovely German man. And he taught me how to meditate one day. And in that meditation, literally in the first 5 minutes, I entered into a state of ecstasy. And I thought, whoa, what's this? What is this about? This is certainly different than that darkness I had over there. I like this. I want this to be a cornerstone of my life. So, so anyway, I wasn't saying this to myself exactly in those words, but it definitely lodged in my consciousness. Yeah. And then by the time I was 20, I was living in a Zen Buddhist meditation center, which, had monks and nuns and an abbot, and some of your listeners may know of Suzuki Roshi, who wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, or his talks are Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So he was my teacher. from 1967 to 1971. And during that time, I was just so happy to be having a very rich spiritual life with lots and lots of meditation. And there was no doubt in my mind that this was the right place for me and I belonged. So one of the things, though, that was very compelling to me was during that period of time when I was getting, messages from the teachings of, if you have a problem, meditate more. Mm-hmm. If I turned a little bit the other direction, I saw that some of the people who were meditating having deep psychological issues come up. And for some reason, I was asked to sit with a couple of them. Now, I was really young. I didn't have any training in psychology. I hadn't finished my BA. And yet there I was sitting with someone who would, on a conventional basis, be called catatonic. Okay. And so I had ability to meditate. And it wasn't like I closed my eyes and meditated when I was with them. But I started asking myself, well, what's going on here and what's the best way to be? And it felt, because I am a sensitive, it felt to me like be quiet, be present, be available, be in a loving space, but don't be demanding at all. So I was called back to do the same thing again. So it was just a real curiosity that happened to me. And then in 1971, well, let's go back a few years. In those years when I was so deeply dedicated to Zen Buddhism, my mother got interested and I taught her how to meditate because she wanted to know. And then she started following Suzuki's teaching. But at the time of July 1971, 50 years ago, she actually was found dead with her thumb in Suzuki Roshi's book. And what I was told was that she had suicided.
I'm so sorry.
And of course I was profoundly shocked, even because it was so unpredicted. I was living in California. She was living in Vermont. And the other thing about it was that I was 7 months pregnant. So of course that increased my sensitivity as well. And it always leaves me a little breathless when I tell this story. So anyway, on the day that this happened, I was actually preparing for natural childbirth. And so I was in a deeply relaxed state when my husband walked in. He was also very involved with Zen Buddhism. And he said, I've got some difficult news. And he sat down with me and just said, your mother's passed away. And at that point, we had no idea what had happened. He'd just gotten a call from my brother saying this went on. And I spontaneously just burst into tears, just very heavy grief. Not that I was so close to my mother, but that there was, we have strong relationships with our parents, no matter if there's stress or not. So anyway, I was deeply crying. And then suddenly it was like a wave came in where I was in complete peace. And this happened within 5 or 10 minutes.
Wow.
And it was as if light just poured through me. And the light didn't necessarily have a message to it, like somebody was saying something in my ear, but more the sense of absolute peace. And the message that I gave it was, whatever has just happened to my mother, she's okay. Yeah. I don't have to worry about her. And that peace lasted for several minutes. And then the thought came to my mind, I have to go through the grieving, no matter.
Yeah.
I have to go through the grieving. So anyway, it changed, but that experience I had was very powerful for me.
Yeah.
And when you say you had to go through the grieving, what did that, if you want to get into it, obviously there's no obligation to answer this. Also, hi, nice to meet you.
Hi. Can I call you Lyric?
Yes, please do.
Thank
nice to meet you. What does that mean for you when you say you have to go through the grieving? I know for some people it looks like going through the 7 steps of loss and dying. I know for Jewish folks it looks more like sitting Shiva, and everyone kind of has their own process.
I had no idea what it was going to be, but I felt that I had to go through the process of flying to Vermont to be with my brother and sister, to go through a funeral process, to recognize what had happened. And of course, I was vulnerable flying at that time, being so pregnant, but I was released to do it. And then I knew that there was going to be a period of time where I was trying to integrate this loss and trying to understand, because as it turned out, it took an hour or two before we found out that that she had suicided. And then something in me said, something's off here. Something is just, I'm not getting the whole story. What's happening? But a mother's hormones, especially prior to birth, are really strong. And at a certain point in my grieving process, I said, I have to put this aside to totally be present for my child that is to be born. So my grieving process was interrupted for a period of time. And then I went somewhat back into it. But again, I was so looking forward to being a mother, and I was very attentive as a mother. And so in some ways it was grief interrupted, because I shifted. And it was, what a gift in a way, because it took me right into life and this precious being that was in full health. And as a being, we seemed to have a very strong connection. So it was, it was easy to be with him in many ways. Yeah. And my husband at that time was quite supportive. So anyway, I just felt like I could relax into the pleasure of having a new son. And the grieving actually kind of went to the side after a few months or so. And I wasn't around family because they were all living in New England. I was living in California. And but then that particular year, 1971, my teacher died. This is Suzuki Roshi, died a few months later, which really just brought up a tremendous amount of grief again. And then my sister-in-law and her husband were killed in a car accident a couple months later. My father's companion died suddenly. And anyway, it went on like that. There was a tremendous amount of death in the family when I was 25 years old.
So young.
Ugh. Yeah. And a new mother to top it off. What a massive responsibility to have while needing to care for all of these emotions, which we can't always meditate our way out of, or through rather.
Right. Well, I'd had that message, Lyric, of meditate. If you get into an emotional place, meditate more. But then I'd had this experience of being with people who were in a state of trying to handle deep emotions and not being able to.
Right. Yeah.
And I had been supportive, and that had somehow been positive. And so, fortunately, in California at the time, there was some really, really fabulous work being done in what today we call somatic experience. But at that point, it was neo-Reichian therapy or bioenergetic therapy. So I put myself into that to handle all of the feelings I was having. And so it wasn't just about my mother. Yeah. It was about a lot more going on. And to top it all off, my dad died as well in that year of complications of alcoholism. So anyway, that old saw, what doesn't kill you makes you strong.
Yeah, it's true.
Somehow, and I think it really rested on my experience with meditation and being around someone who was enlightened. Suzuki Roshi was acknowledged as being self-realized. So being around him and also having deeply studied the Buddhist material, I had something that was like a ground for me that kept me going, as well as being a mother. but that philosophy was extremely helpful. And then I was able to be the client of people who were extremely gifted in somatic experience, which led me into a lot of catharsis that totally blew my mind, that I had so much emotion going on that I had just no idea about. So anyway, I was catapulted into this life of both meditation and really deep process psychotherapy. And before I was 26 years old. So that really got me going. That got the wheels going. And after a little while, I went back to school to finish not only my BA in transpersonal psychology, but also then going on to get my PhD in transpersonal psychology. Cool. And it was because I thought, transpersonal meaning, I don't know if all of your listeners know what that means, but it's the psychology of going beyond ego. So that means we had to study all of psychopathology, which is, the torture of not having a strong ego, and probably struggling with a lot of trauma. Yeah. And then on the other side, moving into the psychology of going beyond ego, which is moving into states that we call enlightenment or self-realization. So I'm not claiming being self-realized or enlightened. All right. That's not my thing.
You are.
I will say that I've been working in the direction of becoming more self-realized for over 50 years. Yeah. So it's been a mainstay for me. And I have not stayed with Zen Buddhism. I actually am part of the Self-Realization Fellowship right now, which has its main offices in California and has a following that's all over the world. Like sometimes I'll go online now to do a meditation. There are 40,000 people on that same live meditation.
It's a live meditation. I was going to say, can you say more about that, the Self-Realization Fellowship?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I should say anything more about my bio before going.
Yeah, go in whatever order your brain would like to go in.
Yeah, just to complete a little bit more. So after I was a client and got so much out of the gifted people that I was able to work with while I maintained my meditation practice, I also took training. So I became a Neo-Reichian therapist, and that was before I got my PhD. So as I was contemplating, so what can my life be about? I thought, okay, I really do want to work with other people and be helpful for other people, which is what people get to when they resolve a spiritual crisis. They really want to be in service to others. And I just felt like the universe had given me lots of signals that was the direction for me to go. So anyway, I went back to school and built on what I'd already learned so that I could be a marriage, family, child counselor. But and so I was licensed in 1988. But at that particular point, I had already been asked to host an invited conference at Esalen in 1985. So I hosted 2 of those conferences, which brought together psychologists, psychiatrists, a small group of us, right? But about 25. And psychologists, psychiatrists, spiritual leaders, people with lived experience of spiritual emergency, as well as a woman who was very highly regarded as a psychic. Oh, cool. And so we looked at what is a spiritual emergency? What's this thing all about? What do people experience? What do they need? How can we best support people who are going through the process? So Stan and Christina Groff, of course, were there because they had created the term spiritual emergency and spiritual emergence back in the 1970s. And this was 1985. So we had those 2 invited conferences. They were both very successful. My dissertation grew out of that. And the book, A Sourcebook for Helping People in Spiritual Emergency. And that was that book was a chapter of my dissertation, and I was asked to publish it and supply a psychotherapist with 2,000 copies. So I said, I'm going to publish this. And so anyway, that got the ball rolling with my publishing books. And Harper San Francisco asked me to write a book that was more narrative, not so much for the academic world. And so that's full of stories. And that came out in 1990. So my specialty was very clearly going to be working with people in spiritual emergency. And I've been doing that since 1990.
And Lyric, before you came in, Emma mentioned that you were 8, right? When you sort of had this thought that you were going to sort of transform the psychology or psychiatric system too. So it's kind of, she knew from a very young age.
Not by myself. I could contribute to this transformation.
Wow. What an incredible thing to know about yourself at such a young age and to have an inkling towards.
Right? Yeah, it's amazing.
Really. I don't know exactly where that came from, but there it was.
That's so neat. So how would you define spiritual emergency? You're obviously getting into that. And
yes, sure.
And why do you think everyone needs to go through a spiritual emergency? Do you think some people can go through life without it?
Yes. So I'll start there, but let's say life itself is a process of spiritual emergence or spiritual awakening. So most people, let's say most people may not use that verbiage at all. Right. So they may have a whole different idea about it. Abraham Maslow talked about self-actualization. Once our primary needs are being taken care of, then we move into really wanting something that feels like it fulfills our full potential. So there's lots of different ways of describing this pinnacle that is our human potential. I happen to think that as people move forward in their own development, they become less ego-centered, and there's the potential to discover that there actually are a soul and spirit first, and that as they discover that and live into it, it's a spiritual experience. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go to church or that they're going to read lots of spiritual books or anything. It could mean that they just take up knitting for the rest of their life, and that's fine. So it's not so much what you do with it, but it's what the feeling that you carry inside. And is there a sense of moving towards your fullest potential? And generally, as people move into that, whatever they call it, there's also a sense of much deeper connection with whatever we want to call it, all that is, or source, or for some people it's God, but there's something larger than our egos. And that becomes more accessible to us as we develop. And as people reach more into that pinnacle, they become more able to have a real felt sense of connection. It's not just, gee, that looks good, I'd like to have that picture in my house. Or even I'd like to say a prayer and maybe that being will help me, but more a sense even of communion, a real deep connection. So anyway, spiritual emergence for some people just takes place gradually over a lifetime. They don't have any crises at all. Maybe they're introduced to meditation or prayer through their parents, and that's part of their life, and they just grow up in a lovely, gentle way and enjoy whatever kind of life they choose for themselves and die in a peaceful place, and that's it. And that's great. And some people, I happen to be one of them, somehow get thrust into a zone where there's a lot of crisis. And at a certain point, a lot of people feel like, wait a minute, it feels like just the rug has been pulled out from underneath me, or the ground has been cracking, as in an earthquake is going on. And I feel in a very unstable place. I can't keep my balance.
Yes.
And so, if we call it an earthquake, that's disorienting for people. They lose their sense of balance. And In some ways, that's exactly what a spiritual emergency is. It can make people lose their sense of balance, but it doesn't have to happen through death or through environmental crises. Those may have a role, but a person may just have, I'm thinking about a client right now that I recently had. She had a lot of visions and dreams as a child, and some of them related to Egyptian mythology. And she was thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense to me. And her parents had absolutely no religious or spiritual connection. In fact, they kind of made a joke of anything that had to do with spirituality or religion. And so she learned that it wasn't okay or safe or easy to talk to other people about her inner experiences. And when she had them, she started thinking, maybe I'm crazy, because this is what my parents would think, that I'm crazy. So maybe I really am crazy. By the time she was 11, she was taking medication. And really, and then later on, around 19, she really got into therapy. For 17 years, she was in therapy with different therapists, hospitalized twice. No one talked to her about her spirituality. She never had anyone ask her about it, of her professional therapists. So it can be, disorienting to open up to these new inner world, inner experiences that may come through dreams or visions, or it may come through travel and feeling like, wait a minute, I've been here before. I know this place. Kind of what some people would call a breakthrough of a past life experience. Or some people just have a more psychic opening where they start realizing that they can sense what's going on with other people without hearing from that person exactly what's going on with them. They just are very open to, and some people who are especially sensitive in that way absorb the feelings that other people have, which again can be very destabilizing, because imagine a young child or even a teenager saying, wait a minute, I don't know if this is my feeling or my mother's. I don't know if this is my feeling or my boyfriend's. And so anyway, spiritual experiences can come to people in a variety of ways. We generally categorize it as a 12 or 13. And it can be disorienting. Where is this coming from? No one's ever told me about this. Or my parents said that it was crazy if I had these even thoughts. Exactly. So the disorientation can be destabilizing, as well as the experience itself. And coming to terms with that, we can call a spiritual crisis. And which is, again, exacerbated if you don't get the kind of support you need.
Yeah. Science in and of itself, I think, is a really spiritual thing for things that, for those folks who are really passionate about it and in love with space. I think that outer space looks like the most spiritual thing to me, because it's so out of this world,
That's how I got into spirituality too, was like the brain and then the universe and or dark matter and dark energy, all that stuff's amazing, because it's like consciousness, and then it's like panpsychism, wherever. But anyway, so yes, Emma, so there's our questions. If you want me to rephrase them at all, but I would love to hear what you think about all of that.
So is the question really about science and spirituality, or
maybe so? Yeah, that'll be lyric. And then mine is like, why you think our culture is so averse to all of this. And is it because there's not money in it? Is it because there's like a fear that if people can heal themselves more naturally, that there won't be money? Or is it, why do you think there's that, fear of it?
Fear of it at the bottom. Well, it is part of the unknown right now, right? Mm-hmm. We can't put it in a box and say, okay, here's spirituality, and we can weigh it and we can sniff it and we can taste it and everything. We can't go there. So it's part of the unknown. And I think a lot of people are just uncomfortable with the sense of the unknown. Like, wait a minute, I like to know that these four walls are around me, and I can open and close the windows, and, there's a sense of security. I've got the ground underneath me. That's good. Yeah. So one of the ways that I like to think about this, might sound quite new agey, but it actually is about either 3,000 to 5,000 years old, and comes out of the Bhagavad Gita, which is some people consider that like the Bible of Hinduism, but it's I don't consider myself a Hindu, but I'm deeply involved with yogic philosophy right now, which will get around eventually to SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship. But one of the things that was described even 3,000 to 5,000 years ago is that there are cycles, 24,000 year cycles that we go through on planet Earth. And the cycle we're just coming out of right now is called Kali Yuga, which could be called the age of darkness, actually. It's an age where people don't have any sense of their spirituality, and they basically don't believe that anything exists unless you can taste it, touch it, feel it, etc. And so we've devised all kinds of ways to just focus on this particular area. And maybe the good part about it is like the Industrial Revolution grew out of it, and all kinds of ways of living more comfortably on the earth. But on the other hand, when you deny spirituality, or let's not even use that word, when you deny the deeper roots in consciousness of who we really are, people start getting really depressed. And sometimes they get pretty darn anxious to go along with it. And sometimes there are other stuff that comes up that's also part of, not feeling well at all. Now, the good news is that we're according to the Bhagavad Gita and other things that have been written around that period of time and discussed, is that we're moving into the Dwapara age. And that's an age where more and more people are spontaneously opening up to the fact that energy is actually more primary than material reality. So Einstein talked about this like 100 years ago, right? It shouldn't be news. It's within science itself, one of the scientists that we actually admire the most, but we haven't fully integrated what he said. We've thought about it. We can see it in books. We can, talk about it, but we haven't fully integrated it into our reality. And so to consider that in the Dwapara age, more people are opening up to the fact that energy is more primary than material reality, but that sometimes will mean someone has like a psychic opening and they can start feeling energy in other people or in locations, or they're more sensitive to feeling it within themselves. And so it leads to a whole other dimension of reality that does relate to some of the science that comes out of quantum physics. But it's still, we think of it as radical at this point. But in the Dwapara age, there'll be more people who open up to subtle vibrations. So that means all kinds of new healing, and we might call spiritual healing or energy work or various forms of massage become more available to us. And certainly, I think all over the United States, well, maybe not all over, but in pockets, all over the world, there's a lot of exploration going on in this area in terms of healing and trusting the intelligence of the inner body to know what it needs for its healing. So that means also trusting our intuition more, whereas that was completely not okay in the Kali Yuga age. Old wives' tales, intuition was worth nothing, to make a general statement. So in the Dwapara age, we can also call it the atomic age. So there's a zone where we see energy as having this vast potential, which maybe it's possible to harness. And certainly now that we're seeing all kinds of new technologies, there's great hope for survival on the planet if we totally open up to these new technologies that are available. But on a personal level, it does mean that there's more psychic opening for people, more spontaneous what can be called spiritual emergence experiences or spiritual experiences. More people connecting with and wanting to connect with the idea that they're the soul before they're the ego, and to make that more evident in their lives. So there's a lot to be said about this, but that's the way I explain it.
It's great. And then, so as you're saying too, it's what Lyric was saying, that they're naturally intertwined. Like that's the work with emergent benefactors that I'm doing too. This idea of recognizing that they work together and they necessarily work together. And so one isn't better than the other. They shouldn't be isolated. They should just inform one another, which is so key. So yeah, I think the work you're doing is just awesome. I had a question about, I think Lyric had a similar question about like medication. So I've been on Wellbutrin and escitalopram for clinical depression for like 2 to 3 years now. And what do you say to sort of people who kind of like are worried that they were like may not be able to function without that medication? Can you still be on that medication and go through this spiritual emergence? Is there what's your opinion on all of that, I guess?
That's a really big question.
Yeah. Huge.
So first of all, my licensing does not allow me to move into a zone where I can counsel anyone on anything having to do with medication. So I can't professionally go there.
Yeah.
And having said that, I can give you some ideas. So one of the most powerful books I think that have been written in this regard was by Robert Whitaker, who wrote Anatomy of an Epidemic. Yeah, and he's written many articles. He's done lots and lots of speaking. He's often invited to come and speak to younger medical doctors, because he really did a meta-analysis. That means an overall analysis of all the studies that have been done around the impact of psychiatric medication. And he was specifically looking at what's the long-term impact. So there have been quite a few studies that have been done, and I'm speaking generically now around all the psych meds, okay? There have been quite a few studies that have been done on the short-term impact. In other words, how long will it take someone to get out of clinical depression if they use X, Y, or Z, and if they can tolerate the medication. So I think it's wonderful to have the knowledge of psychiatric medication, to know that it's there, but it becomes quite clear if you read Robert Whitaker that there are potential dangers in taking psychiatric medication long time. And that doesn't mean for everybody. In other words, some people will tolerate it, but over the long term, one statement he has made about long term is that it can take 20 to 25 years off your life. Literally, if you're taking psychiatric medications for a long period of time. So I because I'm in a position I can't advise people about meds. I don't have enough knowledge about the individual medications, but I do try to keep somewhat up to date with the research that's being done. And it's quite clear that we need research on the long-term impact of psychiatric medications, and it just has not been done sufficiently yet. Although some of the people that are speaking through Robert Whitaker's website, which is madinamerica.com, are speaking about research that is being done in this regard. And specifically, there's been some research. I'm just trying to think of the man's name, Martin. Oh, can't remember his last name right now, but around taking antipsychotics in particular. And of course, if someone gets the diagnosis of being schizophrenic or moving in that direction, maybe they're psychotic and they haven't quite gotten the schizophrenic diagnosis yet. Oftentimes they're told, well, this is who you are, and you're going to have to take meds for the rest of your life. That's just something that can easily happen within the conventional medical system. And Martin Harrow, Harrow, that's his last name. So he did some more long-term studies and clearly found out that that's not true. It becomes, after a certain period of time, when the antipsychotics can be effective, they actually start eroding the person's well-being, as well as their ability to work, as well as their ability to relate to others.
I can say from personal experience, like having been on that for mental health issues that at the time could have been borderline personality disorder. There were questions of other psychiatric disorders as well, but my anxiety was so bad and I wasn't functioning that they were like, here, let's try this antipsychotic. Absolutely true. As soon as I got off of it, it was like getting who I am as a person back. That being said, my ADHD meds were also like rediscovering who I am. And then when I went back off the antipsychotics, I was like, wow, well, this is a combination of things. And suddenly I feel like I can be the most me that I have since I was a teenager.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you for saying that, Lyric. I don't have experience taking psych meds myself. Somehow I've been able to move through the crises I've had without going there. But at times it's been a struggle. You know, it's, if someone had said, here, this will make it a lot easier. I might have said yes, but I just also had a instinctual sense of, this is not my way. I got to do something else. And fortunately, I've had wonderful people to call on to assist me, including being for 20 years involved with the shamanic world.
Yeah, I want to hear about that too soon.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
I was actually going to say, I then had the same experience as Lyric with my antidepressants, where when I finally got on them, I felt like I was the person I was always wanting to be, but couldn't, because of that deep, deep anxiety and depression and all that stuff. So it's also confusing, but I think the medication, if it is okay, needs to be, like, I'm finding what's helped me is supplementing it way, way more with meditation and spirituality and like learning in the universe. So everything you're doing, suggesting, I think is absolutely necessary. And I think if I had encountered your work, I think there's also a chance maybe the medication, I like, you never know. And I think it's so important that we're open to everything. And I think that's why what you're doing is so great, because you're not saying, oh, this type of medicine is bad, we shouldn't do this. You're just saying, like, we should be cautious with everything. These are like some alternatives that can help people. And I just think you do a really wonderful job of approaching it, especially for people who can be skeptical about it. That must be tough too. You probably get a lot of people that you have to respond to.
Well, not really.
Oh,
they self-select, right? The people who are drawn to what I'm doing connect, and the people who really don't care say delete.
Yeah.
Or just don't come. So
yeah, that's
and
true.
I think it's worth pointing out too that the medical system is moving more and more towards having combined treatments. Like, I have an incredible doctor right now, and we discussed my experience with being on those meds before I saw her. And, they were helpful for me for the first few months, but after that, it got to the point where it was taking away more than it was adding. I kind of needed it to get through a tough time, and then I was getting through it and still on them. But she really has been big and supportive in terms of meditation and other kinds of care, because as much as we can do these things and even go to CBT, which can be super helpful, but also be extremely challenging, because to some extent you're changing who you are and your natural intuition about things and trying to create neural pathways that are new, which can be great, but also can be teaching you to not trust your gut in some ways. And I think there definitely needs to be some kind of a middle ground, and your work seems to really address a lot of that, and finding those other spaces that allow you to do that without making you feel like you need to change who you are.
Absolutely.
Well said, Lyric. I really like the way you said that.
Thank you.
It's great. Yeah.
Well,
and we are living in a wonderful world where there are more people in the mainstream medical, where, people who are able to take insurance, for instance, who are saying, gee, let's bring mindfulness in here, mindfulness meditation, and that might really help you de-stress, as well as give you medication for a little while to help with your sleeping. And let's just be in touch around this and develop a program that's right for you, tailored for you. So I really appreciate your story. And I think it's important to say to people, it's not about being anti anything at this point, but it's really about dealing uniquely with each person and what their own unique needs are. And also the resources of the professional that you seek out, or the paraprofessional, can be extremely important, especially their personal resources.
Absolutely. So a lot of what we are advocating for too is like a multidisciplinary approach, right? To mental health and all of that, which is that's sort of what all of the work lately that I've been doing too is on like the importance of interdisciplinarity as we face the climate crisis and the pandemic. But for sure when it comes to mental health and it is so key because one person isn't going to meet all the needs that come with, depression and addiction and all of that. So yeah, I think it's so important. So Emma also you're the executive director of Integrated Mental Health for Everyone, right? And then Emma has this amazing online learning platform too, and offers courses in stress and spiritual emergency. And I'm taking one right now that I just love. But I was wondering if you wanted to say more about that too and why you started it. I think we kind of know that it's your calling, but also, yeah, if you want to just say more about it, because I think so many people would love to take these courses.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So from my story, you've probably gathered that I got a lot of strength, not only from my meditation and my spiritual life, including the community that was holding me during a lot of the crises, but also from psychological breakthrough therapies like somatic experience or neo-Reichian and all. So we haven't spoken about this, but since the year 2001, I've spent a lot of time in Brazil around spiritual healers. And so I saw a lot of extraordinary positive results from people going in the path where they're understanding more about spiritual awakening and being able to shift actually from, in some cases, a diagnosis of schizophrenia to actually being practicing as spiritual healers and be absolutely extraordinary in their ability. But of course, they have to go through a period of training and where they learn how to harness their sensitivities. So sensitivities gone wild without any training can lead people to great imbalance. But once they get that training, if they have the ability to concentrate and form trusting relationships with their teachers, can be a bridge into an extraordinary positive life. Anyway, I don't feel drawn to live in Brazil, and I wanted to bring back all of what I've learned in Brazil, combine it with what I've learned with my PhD and from the shamanic work that I've done, and basically offer people a different way of looking at mental imbalances. Excuse me.
Oh, no problem. We've made you talk for a very long time so far.
Yeah.
I don't mind us. We'll just be here eating up your words. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, wait, that's complimentary lyric. So anyway, it came to me that what I could do at this period in my life was create a platform that people could go to take some free courses to deepen their understanding of what integrative mental health is. In other words, taking the cream of the crop, the best kind of mental health techniques and treatments from all over the world, as including ours. So people can learn about integrative mental health for free, but also start looking at, well, what is this thing called psychosis? And what is this thing called spiritual emergency? And how do people move into spiritual awakening now? Because some people are literally just popping into it without having had a lot of years of spiritual practice. So how is that coming about? So anyway, we offer a lot of free courses, but we also have to, pay for the roof over our heads, as it were, mm-hmm. Pay for all of the things that need to be paid for when you do online learning. And so we charge a modest amount for a lot of the courses that we offer, which have to do, a lot of them, with the phenomena of spiritual awakening, as well as what could be called alternative or complementary ways of dealing with mental health issues. For instance, there's a wonderful homeopath who is on our faculty. And there's another person who works with flower essences. That's actually two people who are on the faculty. and another woman who teaches a course called Grounding for Empaths, which has been extremely helpful for people who have this sensitivity of being very empathic and yet sometimes really have trouble grounding, and they tend to lose themselves in the feelings that are that other people have. So anyway, there are specific therapies that are offered, as well as an overall kind of look at what's going on in the field right now. And because of my own deep interest in spiritual emergence and emergency, I train spiritual emergence coaches and certify them. And we have a international directory of over 80 of these spiritual emergence coaches. And we also offer a course that can be helpful for a person going through a spiritual crisis. Again, that person might feel quite disoriented. On a spectrum, there, of course, it can be relatively slight disorientation to really disabling disorientation. But taking a course where you start looking at, well, gee, here are the 12 or 13 categories of spiritual awakening or spiritual emergence, and which have I gone through, and what kind of tools can help me stay grounded and stay more healthy, and how can I connect with other people who are also having these experiences to get the kind of support that I need. So that's offered for a general audience. And we also can offer continuing education units for healthcare providers.
So awesome. It's so awesome. Also, I didn't know about the grounding for empaths. That sounds amazing. It's also interesting. My dissertation is on hyper empathy and the dangers of losing yourself in others. And I hadn't realized I was right about myself for my entire dissertation. I was like, oh, this applies to me, actually. So, it's quite interesting. But yeah, that would be amazing, because it is like, there's that, it's important, and that service, you get so much from helping others, but then there's, like you say, there always has to be that balance, which is hard to achieve, but which everything you're doing is helping me with too. Like I've been getting to Lyric be part, like take this spiritual emergency course through Emma, and I'm learning so much, and it's so I can't even think of the word, inspiring and comforting and empowering. I think is really, really key. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to helping to promote everything Emma's doing. So it's yes, I feel so lucky to know you.
Thank you.
Love that. I love the empowerment piece too. I think that's so important in helping people grow and move forward. I mean, you can teach people all of these skills and all these things that you want, but without helping people have that confidence and that courage to take the next step, it can only take you so far. It's like going to university and then never doing some kind of a practicum for something like business school, which I 100% did. And let me tell you, I wish I'd done that practicum thing. It would have been very helpful, but also I'm glad I didn't end up in a corporate environment. So, you know,
worked out. Now you're an amazing poet. Lyric is just like, you got published within like your first, I think their first time submitting something, you got published right away, right? Within an hour.
Yeah, I got my first response before the end of the day that day, and my pieces should be coming up in a week, because two of the places I got acceptances from have issues coming out in August.
Congrats. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, Lyric is so talented, so awesome. I also wanted to ask you, sorry, so when you're working in Brazil and then your shamanic work, do you mind talking more about that too, and like what you learned and how that sort of helped you as well?
I don't mind at all. So Suzuki, the Zen Buddhist priest that was my mentor, passed away in 1971. And at that point, I looked at the person who was selected to take his place, and I thought, nope, that's not the guy for me. And it was later disclosed that actually he was sleeping with some of his students, that which is just, you know, one of the ways that gurus have fallen. You know, he's not the only one. It happens all over the world. But anyway, I was a bit at loose ends because I was so deeply oriented towards the work of Suzuki, and then he passed away. And right around that time, I was introduced to a man by the name of Harry Roberts, who had been profoundly involved with a Yurok tradition in Northern California. And Harry had also integrated into the dominant culture of, so he had done things like teach survival during the Second World War and things of that kind. Quite an awesome man. And he took us to some places in California that were known as power spots, that were places where people would do certain exercises in order to empower themselves and move more into their spirituality and into their spiritual strength. And of course, he introduced us a lot to many of the traditional ways of thinking and doing that were connected to his culture. So I learned a tremendous amount from Harry, as did my husband at that time. And at a certain point, I said, wait a minute, I think I have to be with a female shaman. There's a side of this I'm not getting to that I long to get to. And so I put it out kind of as a prayer, and a woman literally walked into my life who was an extraordinary person, Marilyn Youngbird. And she's kind of in retirement now. She's not doing the work she used to do, but she came from a family that recognized her early on as having a tremendous amount of spiritual power. And so she was given the education to take on her abilities as a medicine woman. And she also was called on by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to work in Washington, D.C., helping healthcare providers learn more about the Native American tradition. So she was a bridge person. But when I knew her, she was leading a lot of sweat lodges ceremonies, purification lodge ceremonies, vision quests. And so I studied with her even through graduate school. So on weekends, I'd be able to do the sweat lodge ceremonies and all. And so Marilyn and I were quite close friends for a good period of time until I moved to the New England. So the shamanic tradition has profoundly impacted my life. And of course, there's meditation within that tradition. For instance, I went out on Vision Quest at one point, and for 3 days, I was sitting in a circle that I had created, but there was basically nothing to do, not eat or drink or anything else except pray for 3 days. So it was, there were many profound experiences that I had as a result of being with these people and following through with some of the practices. So back into 2000, I was invited to go and teach in Brazil. And while one of my friends who's paraplegic said, Emma, would you check out this guy called John of God and find out if he might be able to help me walk again? So being quite mission driven, I went, and I had a very strong connection to John of God as well as his community, and ended up being invited to bring people there for healing. So from 2001 to 2012, 11 years, I took 60 groups down there.
Wow.
And spent 6 months out of each year down there. But I was obviously attending to the groups when I was at John of God Center, but then I was invited to travel around to spiritist psychiatric hospitals and community centers to learn more about what they were doing there, and became profoundly impressed because their system of spiritist psychiatry actually goes into some ways of diagnosing spiritual emergency and assisting people who are in spiritual emergency so that they can do things like bridge from a diagnosis of schizophrenia to a life of being balanced, happy, in relationship, and being spiritual healers. So they've, over the last more than 100 years, they've actually developed a way to help people transition in those kinds of ways. So that's a pretty dramatic example, but for other people, maybe they never have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but they're kind of at loose ends. And through studying more with the spiritists, or participating in some of the energy work that the spiritists offer for free, they start tuning into a level of themselves. I just got a message, my internet connection is unstable.
Uh-oh.
So if you lose me, I'll come back as soon as I can.
That's perfect.
And I'm hardwired, so this is bizarre. Anyway, some people, may not go through that difficulty of being diagnosed as schizophrenic, but they might have some kind of sense of something's not quite right. But by participating within the spiritist philosophy, they can move into really harnessing their inner abilities and achieving a very satisfying life. So I consider that the spiritist psychiatry actually is far more developed than what we have in the United States. And the groups I take down there for a 7-day seminar every year will say the same, whether they come from Australia or Europe or United States, Canada, wherever. People are saying, they're just so far beyond what we do here. Within the spiritist psychiatric hospitals, they have everything that you would find in an American hospital in terms of the amount of drugs, so that it's there, it's in their toolkit. But they also use homeopathy, they use family systems therapy, not in all of the hospitals, but they're very open to the newest and the best. So they're clearly take an integrative approach, and they have on staff medical intuitives who can literally diagnose people when they come in terms of what's going on with this person, without even talking to the person, without even seeing the person. They can, they have harnessed their sensitivity to the point where they can hear a person's name and basically meditate for a little bit and get a sense of what's going on with that person. So they work in collaboration with medical doctors who also check on patients. So if you consider that the spiritist psychiatric hospitals have everything you'd find in a conventional hospital here, and on admission, a person needs to see a medical doctor, be checked out on a physical level. They need to see a social worker and be checked out to find out what kind of psychosocial issues that person might have, that might include personal trauma, but also might include things like prejudice, poverty. We could go on and on about all the things that are impacting people these days. Mm-hmm. So all of that is part of the assessment, but also along with that is a medical intuitive who can sense what's going on with this person and what kind of treatment do they need. And that is not held as more important than the psychiatrist or less important. In other words, there's full collaboration, which you wouldn't find in any psychiatric hospital in the United States, I can bet. Yeah. So if there's a medical intuitive called in, or a shaman or something, they're considered as kind of a complement to the real therapy. And it's very, very different in Brazil. So, and this is not all of Brazil, this is just the spiritists, but there are, it's considered 20 to 40 million people at least actually frequent these spiritist centers and possibly use the resources of the spiritist psychiatric hospital. So that's like a fifth of the population. They may not sign on and say, I'm a spiritist forever and ever, and I'm going to go to spiritist whatevers forever and ever, but they use those resources, acknowledging that spirituality has a profound impact on our life, and connecting in with our spirituality can assist us with our full human potential.
Oh, try. I wish I could do that. I've always been trying to develop. I think I've mentioned like
Oh,
synesthesia too, and I might have mentioned last time mere touch synesthesia, which is like the scientific term for like intuitives, basically. I think, right? So there are people that can literally feel the pain of other people, which is exactly what that is. So it's interesting too that sort of it's the same thing but in different language too, and so you combining them I think is so important. Also was thinking too how like a spirit, this is slightly off topic, but how like a spiritual awakening, it's totally off topic, coincides with like an eco awakening. Like I found that when I almost died those few times, yeah, it was like, so what you say exactly, like you just become more sort of in tune with things, and this like deep desire to like help and then recognize how like I am you and you are me, everything's interconnected and beautiful, and therefore you want to help the planet itself. So yeah, that, do you find that then that it is sort of, they coincide?
so great that we're talking about this, because I'm sure some people say, well, why would you want to go through a spiritual emergency? Or
Yeah.
sounds kind of painful. At least her story sure is painful. I don't want to go through that.
Just gotta die.
The outcome, if someone gets adequate support for their spiritual emergence process, the outcome is a person will feel more peace. They'll feel basically much more connected, not only to their own inner process and let's call it the soul, but also they'll feel much more connected with other people. And that doesn't mean that they have to have love relationships with everyone they meet, but more a sense of just profound connection. And that includes profound connection with nature as well, and profound connection with beings of all ages, as well as the animal mineral world. So there's a profound connection that can happen, but also that connection to source, which for many people is like the very ground of feeling really happy.
Yeah.
And out of this, for most people, comes this desire to be in service to other people as well as the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think that is though? Like, why do you think that happens?
Well, like if I'm sure, Bryn, you can think of.
Yeah.
I
mean, I know why. Just
like if we connect with something, we care about it, right?
Exactly.
And we want to make sure that it's okay.
Exactly.
And if we connect powerfully with the earth and with nature, and we realize, wait a minute here, look what we're doing here. We are absolutely raping the resources of the planet. Yeah. We want to do something about it. It becomes really important.
Yeah, it does. I know. And yeah, it's remarkable, the change, like everything you describe. Yeah, that's like, I mean, I've always loved people, but yeah, it's just ever since that happened, it's been this hyper connection and just deep love for everyone. I love you both so deeply. But yeah, it's incredible too, how the possibilities of the human mind too, eh? Like we always say we can't do that, or that's not possible. But again, it's like, because we don't believe it's possible, and then people who do, look what people like you are able to do, and that intuitiveness is so key, and we're also taught not to trust that as well. So I think there is sort of a movement towards like a global awakening, and I've noticed that talking to people from all over the world lately. So yeah, I think we just got to give it a push, and the world will be awakened.
We can even see it in the rise of somatic therapy. Everyone I know is doing things like somatic therapy and EMDR, which I'll go back there. Like, well, not everyone I know, but most of my friends with most mental health issues, we end up having very deep, in-depth discussions about the kinds of therapy we go to see if we're to try it. So yeah, hearing a lot about both of those from most people.
Yeah, Lyric would be a cool con if you ever want to get involved with any of the stuff Emma's doing. Just even like, just let Emma, I'm inviting you. But Emma, I feel like you guys I think you would have a lot to talk about. Lyric's just brilliant, as you can tell, obviously. So yeah, we should all talk. I guess we're talking right now. Yeah. But yeah, no, this is what did you have any other questions, Lyric, before I jump in with something else, and then we can kind of lead to a conclusion?
No, this is great. This has my brain running in a direction that it hasn't in a while. So thank you. I'm really appreciating this discussion. I think that spirituality is something that we think of as so separate from everything else, when really it's at the root of everything that we do. So it's really nice to be coming back to that.
Yes, exactly. That's how you feel too, Emma, right? This is sort of, and that's, you've known since you were 8. Does it feel really satisfying to be self-actualizing like this? Like you've really transformed so much, and it's really spectacular. How does that feel? Really, how does it feel?
Well, I just spent the morning with a 6-year-old who is the son of my niece. And totally lovely to be around, someone who's just so full of joy on a physical level, just running one to one place to another, to the next playground, to whatever.
Yeah.
And you could clearly see the intelligence in his eyes and just the wonderful mystery that unfolds when we get a sense of what our inclinations are, but we don't quite know it until we're older and have been drawn to whatever it was.
Totally.
So I feel deeply satisfied with my life. It's all I can say. I just feel profoundly satisfied and very happy that I'm in a position that I can share with others too.
Absolutely.
That's really immensely satisfying for me.
Beautifully said. Yeah. Then you can see that for sure when you find something. You too, Lyric, like now that you're starting your own website now, and you should tell Emma about if you feel comfortable, what you've been working on.
Sure. I did a life coaching certification this year. During the pandemic, I started running peer support groups because, well, I needed it, and I figured other people probably needed it too if I did. So, yeah. I'm a partner social dancer, so I started with other dancers because a lot of us were really feeling the lack of touch, or rather not feeling the lack of touch. And it was a big effect on folks' mental health. And that made me realize that I wanted to get some kind of education under my wing to run support groups. So I did a life coaching certification. My website, really, I'm just showing it to friends and family for final edits and little details that they might notice. So that'll be up and live and done this week, which feels good. I'm starting with coping through COVID uncertainty and working with social anxiety within that, because I asked people just what's been making you anxious throughout the pandemic and what's been going on with you, what's been bringing up those feelings. And so much of it has to do with interacting with other humans and wanting to feel connected, but feeling super withdrawn and worrying about holding boundaries and going out and being around strangers and what that's going to feel like. So I put all of my decades of experience as a socially anxious person into something that I think is going to really help people. And I'm excited about it and help people work towards things and work through their anxiety and recognize the parts in there that just means that we care about something, and try to hopefully use that as motivation to get a little wind under our belts so we can keep getting bigger ones.
It's so wonderful. That's great.
Yeah. Collaborations for sure.
Use of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Sorry, pardon, Emma?
I said that was a very good use of the pandemic. Sounds like,
Thank you.
A lot of, some people really figured out a way to make it work for them, so they could move in new directions that were satisfying. It sounds like you did it.
Thanks. I feel like I did. And I really think a huge part of it is connection. People think that spirituality means religion or God. And to me, it really largely means the way that I connect with myself and connect with other people and connect with the planet and the things that are around me. Because it doesn't need to mean that I'm praying to something necessarily. It can be being mindful about what I do with my time and the people that I invest in and spend time with.
Yes, I really agree that maybe we can even use the word connection and deepening connection instead of spirituality, because the word spirituality is such a trigger point for so many people. Like, don't even say that word around me because they've been maybe, in shame around something because of their religious upbringing, or just told that spirituality is like really dangerous. Don't go there. Whatever it is, you don't want to participate. And just to say, it really is about connecting to yourself, connecting more deeply with other people, and connecting with something that's much bigger than all of us.
So
I like that.
I love it. Yeah. And you can start to feel the energy too, just that deep love when I'm around people now. It just gets stronger and stronger. So yeah, it's just remarkable. Well, you guys are both so beautifully articulate, and I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation. Emma, thank you for talking to us for an hour and a half. I know how busy you are changing the world. Same with you, Lyric. So thank you for this. And if you feel like a part 2 months from now, that would be awesome, but no pressure it all. So yeah, thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you, Bryn. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Delight to get to know you too a little bit, Lyric.
And thank you, Emma. This has been a wonderful chance to get to know you and hear your story and reconnect with a part of myself that I haven't thought about very much lately. I really appreciate that. And if you ever want to collaborate, please let me know. Your work is fascinating and so important.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care, both of
So
you.
much love. Mwah. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.